Hello, everyone. We are here during the Ricky Williams show, although Ricky Williams is not here. So it's going to be talking to the phantom of Ricky Williams or his spirit guide, perhaps. But
We'll just say
anyway,
hello to him anyways. Hey,
hi,
Ricky.
Ricky. Hi, Ricky. Oh, there. Yeah. So anyway, so we have John Foster on the show. And what I had planned to do was to kind of talk to John Foster about psychological astrology and perhaps evolutionary astrology if Ricky was here, because that's kind of his side of things. But let's just talk to John Foster about intersections of culture and astrology. So, have you ever heard of the concept, John, of like in intersecting things like race and class with an astrological reading?
I have, but that's not something that I would be viewing astrology through. For one, I don't think I have the awareness of what that might require, first of
Mhm.
all. I have a pretty solid way that I see the world. I do try to keep everything objective. I try to keep anything that can be um critical, anything that can be that I perceive as a bias, anything that I perceive that I would personally not advocate. But if the other person, that's their thing, that's okay with me. I mean, God, we live in America. Almost anything, as long as you're not hurting somebody, should be okay. So I don't know if I can tell you this. I was raised in an orphanage and all of my
Wow.
friends were different races. My best friends, generally speaking, have always been black.
Hmm.
Um, just that's the way it happened. I lived with we had about 200 boys that lived at the orphanage that I lived at. Well, it wasn't called an orphanage; it was called St. Francis for boys. It was a vocational center, actually. Um, so from the age of about 9 on, I lived outside in orphanages and stuff like that.
Wow.
So I have a good, I've always got along with everybody because I grew up with everybody.
Hmm.
When I went overseas and went to Taiwan and went to Guam, had no problem associating with other people,
Hmm.
which is interesting because I'm from Philly and Philly tends to be streetwise and nationality wise, and they're all group oriented. And I never was immersed in that, I think. And so I was spared that particular set of biases. And so I mean, I've always loved getting along with everybody. So
Hmm.
from that standpoint, would I, if I were doing a consultation with someone, I would try to get an idea of what level their life is at. For example, I would not talk to a wealthy person the same way I would talk to someone who's struggling.
Hmm.
Okay, as an example,
Interesting.
I would not view the astrology that's correlating with their life experience at that time in the same way. If I saw Jupiter coming to the sun in a new opportunity cycle in a businessman's chart, then I would be expecting that something's going to happen. But if I'm talking to a person who's living in their home, am I going to sit there and say, "Oh wow, you have a new Jupiter Ori cycle that's about to start. What big opportunities do you see happening for yourself?" No, I wouldn't see that. I'd be very sensitive and but I would be looking for that, trying to spot if there were opportunities. So I think I don't think I would look at it in the way that the question was posed. I that's not the way my mind works.
Well, I think there is, well, you are kind of looking at it. Okay, so in we look at things in the structure here, and this goes back to Ptolemy's Tetrabiblos of like the four influences on a growing creature. So we look at like culture or genetics, sorry. So your genetic seed, then the culture and climate you're growing in, and then your chart, right? So like you actually are addressing that kind of four tier with saying the level of wealth or cultural, climate of the person is going to affect how the chart, expresses. Like Jupiter going over the sun of somebody who has a lot of resources available to them can be a lot more expansive than somebody who is kind of very limited. Now, we could say that the similar thing is happening to them chakrically. Like in both cases, Jupiter over the sun spins the chakra of that sun sign, wildly or something like that. And then the surrounding environment that they're in affects like how much they can, utilize that energy or what that looks like. So why wouldn't you read it the same if it was people of two different situations? Like what changes there?
Everything changes because they're completely different human beings.
Hmm.
I mean, you can take a general principle, and if I'm walking, if two people are walking on the street and they're walking up to a light, how they approach the light as it's turning green or red is going to be different. What's happening in their mind at that time is going to be different. They're not going to both see exactly the same thing, even though they both see the green and red light or red light. So I
Mm,
mean, and that's something simple and it's material and it's tangible and it's out there. Imagine the stuff now that's going on the inside of the psyche, the
mm,
stuff that you have no idea about,
mm.
okay, because it's unconscious.
So what if they're genetically the same, like they're identical twins? Would you'd still see them as totally different people?
I would see. I happen to know, grew up with two close friends. One of them was a male twin, or were two twins that were male, and one was a set of twins that were both female. And I can tell you that they grew up, they may have been born a few minutes apart, but they did their best in order to differentiate themselves from each other. They didn't want to be seen. Now, I know we've seen movies and things like that, and I don't have experience with this, but I have seen movies where certain twins will actually enjoy the fact that they're the same. And they will try to milk that for whatever it is. And when we see them playing, and one person will meet a friend, and then they'll actually switch, and then the other person will go, and we see things like that. But on the other hand, my experience with the twins that I knew was different, and they were different. The other thing too is that parents treat twins differently. If you ever watch even shows where there's a set of twins and look at the way they do it, even from the simple sense of this, they're identical. Let's say they're really identical and they look the same. What does the parents do? They dress them differently so that the parent, can identify who is who. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how does the child process the fact that the parent is seeing them different?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's going to be different.
Mm-hmm.
So this is one of the reasons why you can't even take twins. And in fact, often in twins, I remember a study that I read. I can't remember where it came from, but many of the twins wound up being in totally different careers so that they can differentiate themselves from each other.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, those career choices may have archetypally fit within the chart that they have, because the chart doesn't say you have to be a carpenter, you have to be a teacher. Okay. It might suggest that that would be a good area where you could manifest your talents, and this would be a good way for you to express your sun, moon, and your Mercury and your Venus and all of that. But they're in our day and age, especially in America and Western Europe and places like that, there's so much variation that you have so many different opportunities to express yourself. So,
Mm-hmm. We could say
um,
that some ch charts of twins, if we look at that chart layer, are differentiative, and other ones are like want to be like each other. Like there's videos on YouTube of twins who eat the exact same amount of calories and like try to look exactly the same, even to like the way they weigh and stuff. And that might be a set of twins that is like a Taurus Sun Cancer Moon set of twins where they're really attached to each other and they like things to be very stable. And but if we have Aries twins with Scorpio moons, like they might be very differentiative because they're more individualistic people astrologically. And so I think it really depends on the astrological makeup of the twins, how much they go off in their own direction.
it's a good surmise. We don't know. See, what we're talking about is where we are taking what we know about astrology and we're assuming that it should be this way. For example, with the Taurus, if there's a Taurus influence, we know Taurus is one of the most stubborn signs in the universe, and it doesn't like change. So it's going to settle into something, and it's going to figure out what it likes best. It's going to teach its mind that this is the only way that things should be, and it's going to try to resist any change to that. Whereas, like you said, if it's an Aries, Aries wants to go out and experiment, wants to try things, wants to do something different. And maybe you're right. Maybe if we took the twins and we compared this set of twins to five other set of twins with different astrological signatures, then maybe you're right. Maybe we would find out that based on the cardinality, the elements, based on something within the astrology, if one were fiery, then maybe they're more likely to want to be different. Maybe if they're more earthy, maybe they're more likely to want to be stable and be the same. And because they are afraid of change, they don't like change. Change unsettles them. So, yeah, you could be right. Now, again, when we say this, we don't know because we don't have any studies or anything that we can go back on that I'm aware of that we can look at. So everything that we're saying is speculation,
Well,
as
I
quite
think
frankly, most things in astrology are, but
Well,
that's the
so I
point.
think if we, okay, so astrology, what is it? Is it a science? Is it, what is it? I think if we look at it as a technical philosophy, then we're just philosophizing about the differences. And it's kind of technical. And we're saying this chart layers like this. And so I think from a technical philosophical perspective, we can deconstruct the situation of twins from these layers of development and be spot on philosophically. I don't think we have to say that we have to use astrology scientifically. Like now we've been asked to do an NCGR SIRG, a special interest research group, but we're going to try to take a scientific bent on the whole study because a lot of people want to see astrology used scientifically. And I think in that case, we would have to design a study for twins that made some sense to see what was the chart, what was the cultural layer, like all this is kind of stuff. We would have to design research studies that actually were scientifically, you know, um, sound basically. So it's like, I don't know, what do you think the use of that is? Is it useful to try to make astrology scientific, or should we just leave it as a technical
I
philosophy?
don't think I don't. I think we should try, but I think we're going to have. I mean, the closest we got was those. What was his name? Oh my goodness, a brain fart here. The closest we got was those studies where they found out that if Mars was close to the ascendant within X degrees,
The Gauquelin studies?
then what's that?
The Gauquelin studies?
Yeah, the Gogolin studies, right. The closest we got to being scientific was there were a couple examples of where more famous sports people had Mars close to the ascendant, and that could be in the 12th house or it could be in the first house, somewhere within that span. We had more, I forget what it was, writers who had the moon close to the MC in the ninth and in the 10th house, and we had scientists were another thing, and but it wasn't statistically dynamic that it was able to be proven without a shadow of a doubt. So, however, like I said, and I feel the same way. In my life, I started expecting that astrology was more fatalistic, that somehow I would be able to not only figure out what was going to happen for me, but for others, and therefore and in my case, I think it went back to the insecurities I had about myself because I didn't know who I was most of my earlier years, and you know, uh, I was looking for. I'm a triple Scorpio, so I'm the opposite of Taurus, but I want the security too. Okay, but I probably wanted it at a deeper level and just experience it differently. So I think I studied astrology in order to give me a sense of control over life because my life was out of control in some ways, at least the normal life with a normal family and all of those kinds of things, and the normal experiences that a teenager goes through, and so on and so forth. My life was not like that, so I think I was looking for that. But over the years, what I discovered trying to find, and I've read all the theories about it, and I've read all of the quote unquote scientific astrology and all of that. And the best that I can get is the science is in the astronomy. You can calculate the things down to the exact second of where something was, but thereafter it's art because in every culture the astrology is different. The Indian astrology is different than the Western astrology. The Middle Eastern astrology is different than the European astrology. There is African astrology that we have no clue about that was mentioned on some of the lectures during some of the NORWAC seminars that we don't have any clue about. There are similarities between all of them, but there's different archetypes that they look like to bring out the same.
Mhm.
So And then there's so many different types of astrology to cover everything because, like I said, astrology by necessity must explain everything in life. So in a way, it is philosophical.
Right, and if
From
you
that.
look at even the suffixes like astrologia would be like the
Mhm.
logos of of the stars, which would be like the logic and kind of way of I mean if we looked up logos in the Greek dictionary, it'd probably be like the story around the stars or something like that. Where
Or as the stars speak.
astronomia, nomio, nomos are like rules or laws or so it's like maybe we could leave it to the astronomers to say well, these are the things that we know about the stars. These are the temperatures and the distance from the sun and all this kind of stuff. These like numbers and facts and figures. Whereas the logos, the storytelling, it's hard to really, say a story is right or wrong in some way. I mean, I guess you can in a court of law you say this story is right or wrong, but it's like anthropological research uses a lot of storytelling. And our anthropologists, scientists, I mean, they're kind of philosophical scientists. They kind of look at a scientific explanation of why, species are the way they are, but I don't know how much they do literally mathematical studies.
Well, even think about the hard sciences like science and math and all of them, and now go back 1,000, 2,000 years and find out what parts of those math were known then, or what parts of science were known then, and how each and every, I don't know, decade, century of science replaces the concepts that were known before it. What we know is the best that we know right now. It's
Mhm.
not really the truth. Even science, where everybody thinks that we should base everything on the science because science is now the new God. Science is not God. Science is an evolving understanding of the way things work. And we understand that based on putting all of these numbers and working them backwards, we come up with this formula. And based on this formula, wow, we can predict where things are going to be in 20 years, 50 years, 100 years. And then later we find a different way to do that. And I, so even the sciences are not as black and white as we tend to think of them.
Well, so much of
And
science is what's funded. What research is funded decides what stories science tells. I mean, if astrologers were funded to do scientific research, we could probably have the time and space to figure it out of how to do this. So I think, so much of it depends on what the government decides that they want to look at also, or whatever sources of funding come in.
and that's pretty sad because if the government is deciding what is science, no matter what political spectrum you're on, that's not a good thing. Okay, that's not the way science is supposed to be. It's not the way it was designed. Um,
Hmm.
anyways, we could talk philosophically about that.
Yeah.
I have a strong belief in God, and they kicked God out. They don't even consider him anymore. There is no such thing as God for a scientist, for a modern day philosopher. They don't
Well,
even
okay,
do
so
down
I
to
so
that.
I got into it with my dad about God when his last visit here. Now he's an astrophysicist, and you have to understand he's a Capricorn Sun, Gemini Moon. So of course he's going to study the facts and figures of stars because he's a Capricorn. Like I'm a Gemini rising with a Pisces moon, so I would like to look at the feelings of the stars and so like we just have different builds of what we're looking at. But of
Mhm.
course he like attacked me for the God concept, because he's more on the atheistic side of things. And I had to really make the case that without the concept of God, he is actually lacking in something. Like, because all the astrophysicists are just poo-pooing all of us who utilize the God concept to make a better life. And it's like, it's not so much do I believe in God or not, but I'm evolved enough to use the God concept without crying like some of these scientists do. It's like, why do you have to cry over a concept? Like, I don't understand what the problem is. Sorry, that was me being a little mean there.
No, it's. I understand what you're saying. I get frustrated with if someone of this mental acuity were honest with themselves, they would have to admit, you know what? I don't really know. So how can I call myself an atheist? I should call myself an agnostic. I don't know. I
Hmm.
don't know if there is. I don't know if there's not. Based on the current way that I see things, I feel like there's not. But maybe I'm wrong. This has
Well,
happened
it's
to
funny
lots of
how science
philosophers over life.
Well, scientists ask the wrong question about God. They say, like, is God real or not? I'm like, okay, you're asking a question about God, but is that the good question to ask? Like, maybe a good question would be like, how can the concept of God help us to be better, more evolved people by allowing us to have more complex thought forms and more loving thought forms? And like that's another question about God. But it's like what is asked by science, scientists always ask like they're asking the right question. And it's like, so that's one of the things about scientists is it's the we're right phenomena, right? It's like, and that's so Capricorn Gemini. It's like I have the correct ideas. Like where the astrologers are more like nice, watery people, a lot of us, and we're like, well, we're not right or wrong. We just are feeling the thing, and you know what I mean. But I just see what I'm saying is like so much of what science studies is what it asks to study, and then it's like you got to get a good question going.
Yeah, it's part of the ethos of our age that we tend to be materialistic.
Hmm.
We've gotten rid of the spiritual because there is no such thing. There's not even consciousness. All consciousness is an illusion. It's just your particular set of atoms at the being that, and your particular set of atoms spaced apart somehow with blood flowing through them. You have this sort of life energy and then you create these thoughts and all that. And then after that, nothing else. Oh, the electricity was taken away. Now there's nothing. I mean, it's like everything. Anything that's non-material
Mhm.
is wrong. It's not there. It doesn't exist. You made it up. You're imagining. You're deluded. Okay. You're on drugs.
Well,
Um,
with the CERG, they're kind of asking us to do research, so that's why I've got started to think about this scientifically. Like, I don't usually like get cranky with my dad, but it's because I'm in this like science versus philosophy moment, right? Well, it's like, okay, so I think if we're going to look at it scientifically, we might look at that molecular layer, and I think it would be photonics. Like looking at the light waves coming out of the chakras would be a way to study astrology a little bit scientifically, would be like with a pendulum, you'd say, I have this, my heart chakra is spinning at this certain level as I've checked with my pendulum. And then when Saturn goes over my moon, my heart chakra shuts down and is spinning very smallly. That would be like studying the photonics of the human form under the certain celestial influences. And I was talking to my brother about it today, and he was like, well, there could be some interference by the holder of the pendulum. So you might need to hook the pendulum up to your ceiling and like do it that way. And so like there are ways to really like get out like confounding variables and things like that. But it's like it's just I feel like the NCGR is challenging us, John, to do this scientifically.
well, and that thing that your brother said, it's so true because they said that the observer of an experiment affects the results of from the observation. Okay,
Wow.
so I mean, what we see is based on us looking. If we're not looking, then we don't see whatever it is that we think we see.
Interesting.
So I mean, even the wave and the photon thing. I mean, it depends on the way the experiment is designed. Okay,
Yeah.
so I mean,
I
I
do
don't
think
know.
I
I
do
mean,
think we could get a team of really smart astrologers together because the astrologers keep fighting with me and they're like astrology like recently I met with this guy Eric he's the Agrippa translator guy and he was like well astrology is divination it's not science and I'm like astrology can be used scientifically like you can't say it can't be used scientifically but it's like I keep having to have the fight and then Samuel Reynolds and I were going on about can astrology be studied scientifically and what I keep hearing from the astrologers is this cannot be studied scientifically. And so like I'm actually feeling challenged to get like a group of the 10 of us smart astrologers to see could we design a study where we actually do some really good research because it just for the challenge of it. I mean,
well, think about okay. So if sociology is science, then what is the work that Rick Tarnas did? Is that really not a kind of sociology from world history and combining the two and then showing the correlation of the planetary patterns all the way through and then being able to make predictions based on the correlations of those particular archetypes? I mean, that's a pretty good example. I mean, when I read that book, it blew my mind.
Interesting.
because that's the closest thing I've ever seen outside of individual stuff. I'm talking at a high level. I mean, that is a well, what he did was well designed, and how he put that together, and there is research that has come further out of that. I haven't read much about it, but I've heard about it. So I think, yeah, I think it's possible. What I don't think you're going to get is, if you have the sun in Aries, then it's going to always equal this. Or if you have the moon in Capricorn, it's always going to equal this. Um, you know, you're going to see, and this is what I learned through trying to study all of Gogolin stuff and also trying to do some research on my own with my astrology program. I was looking for trying to put things in specific little boxes, and I couldn't, because so I think it's partially because in a way we are the entire zodiac, and therefore we have all of the things potentially in us, but we tend to emphasize those things that are archetypally prominent in our chart. Okay. So that's why it's hard to see, like, writers are only going to be Gemini, as an example, or Sagittarius is going to be those who publish books, or stuff like that. You're not going to find it. You're going to find that spanned around the entire thing. Um,
Well, we
so
could say that the nine other planets in the chart are confounding variables in the
yes, absolutely, for sure.
just the analysis of that one thing. And so I think here we have to, instead of grouping, like your software is amazing for grouping studies, where we group, like you could search by, you were showing us that last time, which I think is amazing for that kind of research. I'm really interested in longitudinal research against one chart itself, so like if we said your Scorpio parts are hyper focused, maybe we make that conjecture or that hypothesis. Well, then we can study your Scorpio aspects longitudinally over time to see, is John hyper focused when his chart would be, triggered in the Scorpio area, so it's like we're studying it, but then there's a lot of confounding variables there too, because never do we get the same transit reproducing, because there's all these different, the planets don't repeat except for like every 16,000 years. So it's like, so that becomes a lot of confounding variables of the planets are in different spots and things. And then we know that because you can see your transits, that informs the equation too. And like, so it's like, I think there is a big challenge in really now, I wonder
It's
if
it's
physicists.
not it's not easy to do what you're saying. I mean, in a way, if you wanted to do what you're talking about, you would have to get not just some scientists now, but you'd have to get some astrologers, scientists over the next 100 years, who decide now they're going to work together for 100 years, and then start to track people at their birth time, then start making conjectures, and then start trying to, and then somehow observing and denoting and writing it down, and then looking at those cycles over that. I mean, that's the kind of work that you would have to do in that. Because otherwise you're relying upon, for me, you're relying upon my memory. I don't know. I
Mhm.
certainly don't have a photographic memory that I'm aware of. And I'm a very deeply emotional person. So I tend to process things emotionally. Once I get past my emotions, then my brain kicks in, or I'm consciously aware that I'm stupidly being emotional, and my brain kicks in and says, "What are you doing?" Okay. So I'm going to not necessarily um, be able to be a good denoter. What's the word I'm looking for? Journal. I'm not going to be a good journalist for that. I could probably be a good journalist of some of my feelings if I were writing them down at the time, and I could express the intensity of the emotion. But you'd have to have something like that over long term, over a vast group, in order to get past the scientific study aspect of it.
Have
It's
you
not
heard of
it's
that?
not easy.
Have you heard of that TV show? This it's called like Seven or something, where they tracked that group of kids every 7 years. They would come back and videotape them, and
I don't think so.
there are
It's
longitudinal
interesting.
studies that start at the age of birth and go on. I mean, like you're right, that it might take some scientific foundation would get a hold of babies and study their photons from the time they're born before enculturation and things like that. And like, I mean, I think what you're saying is valid, and I think it could perhaps be done. Now, let me ask you this. Do you think astrophysicists see things like anthropology as science, or do they see that as kind of like pseudoscientific, um,
I don't know. I don't know enough
philosophical?
people to think about it. It depends on the arrogance of the mind,
Yeah,
because I would imagine there's many scientists who, and I've read this, I've heard this, who don't think psychology is scientific and
right.
think psychology is just a fancy way of being astrology without astrology. And in a way, astrology has always been psychology. So the two are interrelated, whether the psychologists want to understand that or not. A lot of what they think came from their parentage, which goes all the way back to the astrological things. I think anything that is not hard scientists believe is not science. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they think that way.
Yeah. Well, I love how for some reason we feel like if it's scientific, it's like better or right. Like there's some bias there of like my mom's a psychologist. She has a psychology degree, and it's like I do definitely think that okay, so I have a scientist father and a psychology mother. Like the psychologist wouldn't say, "Oh, that scientist is below me." Like but I feel like the scientists would be like the psychologists are below us because it's not there is kind of a pedantic nature to hardcore scientists of like,
Absolutely.
is
And
it,
it's
am I
the
making
same.
that up? Okay.
Yes, I think you're right. Liz Green, the astrologer from England who wrote a lot of books and very prominent, she said that her fear, what she's learned is that many astrologers and many scientists have a fear of change, and they need the security of knowing that things are the way they are in order for them to be able to operate in the world. They need that sense of this is right and that's it. They
Hmm.
need that.
Hmm.
Okay. And they look for that in the profession. So many astrologers will look for evidence that astrology is fatalistic. Fatalistic gives them a sense of security. Okay. Whereas for me, that doesn't work. I may have once thought that when I was immature and young, but I don't think that's true at all. I very much, as we discussed months back, free will guy. And it's the same thing with a lot of scientists. They need that sense of security. That's what underlies it. It's what underlies the arrogance of it. It's that, well, there's a lot of reasons. There's cultural reasons. There's the age that we live in, which, like I said, has dethroned anything spiritual, and sciences have been elevated to the new high priest,
Hmm.
and so they're taking over the role. They become the new priest and then whatever they preach, that's God. Although they don't call it God, okay, because they can't use that word. I don't can't use the word God. What does that mean? But anything we give our allegiance to in an ultimate sense really is our God. Okay,
Fascinating.
um,
Yeah, I can see where
so
they kind of worship science, kind of like some people worship God as like
it's a
the
religion.
thing that makes sense of everything. I think maybe a question I like better is astrology useful? Not is it
Absolutely.
real or is it testable in a court of law? Is it useful and in which ways is it useful?
I think it's definitely useful because, like I often say, I wouldn't be studying astrology probably if I had not met Noel. And Noel showed me and taught me his psychological approach. And he also taught us prediction. And there's no doubt that there's a sense of prediction, because how the heck can solar arcs, where you're giving approximately 1 degree to each of the planets and you're moving them symbolically, and then when Uranus comes along and equals your ascendant, all of a sudden your life gets disrupted? How does that happen? How does it have that correlation? Now, it doesn't cause it, it's not causing it, but it correlates with it. Now,
Hmm.
how is that possible? I don't know. I don't got an answer for that. That's the mystery that I have now embraced. Have embraced the fact that I'll never know how it works, at least not in this world.
Hmm.
Okay. So, and there's so many things like that. I mean, the Saturn cycle, as it works its way around the chart, moving you through one phase and shifting and all the way up to when Saturn's at your MC by transit, and all of a sudden you're either getting rewarded for the career that you helped to build, or you're so dissatisfied with it, you're saying, you know, that's it, I've had enough, and then you take a change at that particular point, and same thing down near the ascendant. Why does that happen? Now, do I have scientific evidence that shows that a preponderance of when that happens is at those 2 points? No. But I've seen it so many times in my clients and
Mm.
in all the consults that I've done over the years and all the friends that I have, and it just works. So yes, it's absolutely useful. Um, if you believe in what the chart pattern represents, which generally speaking you will, and you find out that these are talents of yours, how can that not be useful? Or if you find out that, you know, you're mostly earth, and you're going to really struggle with the thinking process. So if I were to tell you that that's just part of the way the chart is, you're supposed to have a natural feel and talent for anything earthy, but you're supposed to struggle with this. So somehow you need to learn how to grow in this area that you're most uncomfortable in, as an example.
Mm-hmm.
Or whether it's emotions which are suppressed and whatever. Astrology can help you see that, and then therefore you know, oh, I need to work on that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the
But I
same
think
stuff.
a really interesting question that I kind of teach my students to ask is, can we see observable evidence of astrology at work in certain cases, right? So it's like, even if we can't say, "Oh, okay, we've proved astrology to be scientifically factual," we can say, oh, when the sun went into Gemini and the sky went bright blue, which, and it got very crisp outside, this is observable evidence that the sun in Gemini is at work here. And like, or, if you have a rash down your Mars line during your Mars return and a heat symptom, we could say this is observable evidence of astrology at work. So I think collecting instances of observable evidence is in some way proving astrology as scientific, but it's not necessarily the scientific method that we are taught with, which involves repeatability, whereas which astrology doesn't really offer repeatability because of the planets not, repeating for every 16,000 years. But we can say there are evidences everywhere.
And I think that's it. I mean, that's part of the reason why science is worshiped now, is because of that one principle there, that we do a study and we put these variables into this little pile, and out of it always comes the same thing. Okay, but that's not the only way. There's other ways that they've been fighting for years in order to get a place in the mindset of people who push these ideas, to show that that's not the only way to see the world. And that, yes, if you design a world where everything, if you design a world based on this is the model, and you design a world where everything has to be reproducible, then everything else is going to by nature be excluded. So you're even closing down the possibility that there could be another way of looking at the world,
Mm,
because you so restricted yourself to seeing things through this one model. Okay. It's like looking at a movie and watching the same movie over and over and over for 50 years and wondering why, and saying to yourself, see, I've watched the movie 100, 500, 1,000 times, and it always had the same outcome.
mm,
The
mhm.
movie's
Yeah,
right. Come
yeah,
on.
yeah. Well,
Okay. And life is like that.
Well, I love what you're saying though, because like in science is restriction, is limitation, right? It's very Saturnian, right? Whereas other things are more Neptunian, where we see imaginings and all these other ways things could be. And it's like, what about this? What do you think of astrology being looked at as identity politics? Like maybe under the case of cultural studies and comparative literature, where it's like it's more of an analytical field, but we're looking at like the politics around people's identity.
I personally don't even like that thought process of identity politics. Hate it.
Okay.
Okay. So that's my conservative nature, and based on the fact that I've been around the world in a certain thing, and I think that's very disruptive. However, I can understand what you're saying, because there is a sense, based on the way things were or have been, that were put in boxes based on whatever the tags were that they were given, which let's call that identity. And there's something to that. But I think it's more that astrology represents anything that happens in life. It is able to work with all human experience, and then archetypally it has an answer for all of that, because whatever happens in a human life, there's some archetype that's bigger than it, no matter what it is. I mean, my God, I mean, if we wanted to get silly, if I drink from my glass of water, there's an archetype of a water bottle somewhere, as an example. I mean, we can
Wow.
get really silly about it, but so there is an archetype that will represent those tags that people have been put in, whatever they were, identity, okay? And there will be tags for non-identity. There will be an archetype for identity. There'll be an archetype for non-identity. There'll be an archetype for male, female. There'll be an archetype for non-male, female. There'll be an archetype for binary. There'll be an archetype for non. So everything that happens to a human being must, by definition, be correlated somehow to astrology, and vice versa. I mean, it's just the way it is. That's why people have the knock that, well, anything can be explained in astrology. Well, yeah, that's true.
Hmm.
That
Hmm.
doesn't mean that it's correct, but yes, you're right.
Well, I
So
mean, yeah, you can put on your astrology lenses and look at any single thing. And I think, because it's a study of kind of the essential nature of things, it's like, well, what's the essential nature of this or that? But I think you could take a women's studies lens and put it on anything. You could analyze our conversation today from a women's studies lens and say, what was Andrea overpowered by John? Or, like I can look at my air conditioner from a women's studies lens, or like we can do that with all like theoretical, queer theory is another lens we could look at things through. Or like, when people watch football and they're like, oh, those guys are homoerotically jumping on each other. Like that's like a lens you put on, so it's like I'm always teaching my students, if the astrology lens is overwhelming, you take off your astrology lenses and look through the normal, you know,
I would say
atmosphere.
be objective, and then
Okay.
you don't have to worry about the lens. I mean, you do have to worry about it because you're trying to be objective. For example, I personally don't have a lot of respect for certain politicians, okay, as an example. I despise them. However, if they came to me for an astrology consultation, I would take off those emotions. Honestly, I would take them literally like this, put them over here, and then be able to treat them as a human being, because at that time they're just another person on the other side of me. Okay,
Hmm.
they're not in that role. It's not that I don't like the person. Now, that's good. I'm glad we clarified. I don't like the role that they play when they're playing that particular politician.
Hmm.
Okay, because it just grates my core principles about the way people should be treated.
Hmm.
So and why did we say that? I forgot what I was going to
I don't know.
say.
I feel like our episode today has become about like, what is astrology? Is it science? Is it something else? Like, I feel like we're like definitely looking at this as like, what
Kind
is
of
it?
everything. It really is. It necessarily has to be. Now we can limit it, like you said. We can put glasses on it, and we can see it through a horary lens. And we could put glasses on it and see it through a traditional lens. We could put glasses on it and see it through a modern day astrological, psychological lens. We can put lenses on it, and we have it over here. We have queer theory astrology. We have women's astrology. We already have all of those groups that you've talked about. And they're necessary to go down in order to understand different things. Some of it's probably going to be right on target, some of it's going to be extreme. Um, okay, I'm going to try to not be judgmental. It's going to be extreme. Let's just put it that way.
Okay.
Just like other areas in and other areas that have been extreme in the past. I mean, Jesus, once we burn witches on because they espouse something that didn't fit in a particular straight and narrow standard over
Okay.
here,
Let
as
me
an
ask you
example.
this. Why do you think astrology is not in the university?
Why do I think astrology? Because scientists and other people think it's a bunch of yakety yak, and because there are enough people out there who there's a lot of charlatans in our field. Let's put it that way.
Hmm.
Okay. Like for example, I have a lot of skepticism towards psychics, but I do believe that there's some psychics who have true psychic ability, but there are others who are just using general human patterns in order to create income. So they become very good at being able to suss out what the issue is in you. Like I could do it myself. We could sit here in a non-astrological consultation and get to the same things we would get to in an astrological consultation because we're people. There's only so many things, really, big things that people can go through in a life. That can be to different degrees. Some of them can be really harmful. Some of them not so much. They're just, just shallow touching. But I think that's the case. It's astrology is easily manipulated. It can be used by in weird ways. There have been cultic groups that used astrology in order to do what they want. They've given it a bad name. There have been other people to do things. Um, I mean, you hear stories about it all the time. Of even in our modern age with good astrologers, somebody will come to you and go, "Oh, that person said to me that I have this and that, so therefore I'll never be able to do this." Okay.
Hmm.
Now, that's more of a traditional spin on it, probably. That was probably based on some astrology that was created 2,000 years ago, evolved over the last thousand, didn't modernize, was still stuck in the 14th century, and then trying to impose the 14th century on a modern day person. Can't do that.
Hmm.
Well, you can do that, but that's bad.
Hmm.
Okay.
Well,
Astrology must evolve to the level of the people that you're dealing with. It has to.
so it drives me crazy a little bit because, like, having read the ancient books in Greek, what I learned was teleology, which teleology was existed in the ancient times. Like, teleology was all over the Bible, and teleology was all in all the astrology books I read. And in the book Ensoulment, we read about how the soul gets in the body. It was all filtered through teleology, and teleology is the philosophical study of things becoming themselves. For example, teleologists would study. It's also evidence of design in nature. So they would constantly compare humans to plants. And it's almost like ancient philosophical development theory that also encompasses like things have their own nature and they grow into themselves. And so astrologers were teleologists. In fact, the Tetrabiblos was called apotelosmatica, which is like basically like the study of things growing in themselves, full on. Like and the astrologer's job was be to help the person grow into what they're growing to, but in a mega manifestation way. And so I think it drives me nuts that if we were called teleologists or something of the like, that we could be housed under the philosophy department, but we're technical philosophers who do this kind of like reading of charts thing. And that's why I feel like we're rogue and outside of the university because like you can't like be a psychology professor and like do psychological appointments for your students. But I mean, you could be an astrology professor and not do readings for your students. I mean, you could just look at it philosophically and then let them read for people. I mean, I think astrology could be housed in a university if we looked at it as teleology.
Yeah, I think it could. I mean, I understand what you're saying. I mean, I often say, a cherry seed is going to produce a cherry tree. Your chart is going to the potential for what that is going to be the stuff that you have to start in life and that you have to work with. The only thing is it's not as cut and dry as you only can become a cherry tree. That's the difference is it's much more vast what the potential is, but how that soil is treated, how the early background was, what culture were you in, what church did you grow up in or not grow up in? How did your parents treat you? How did they treat you in comparison to your brothers and sisters? Were you considered to be like in my family, I was the brain. My brother was the brawn. His whole life, my poor brother was taught that your brother's really smart. Basically, they told him he was stupid. And I unintentionally propagated that thing. Whenever I got a chance to see him, I would say, well, you got the height because he's like 6'3", but I got the brains, as an example. And I did this for years and years and years, even to the last time I saw my brother.
Hmm.
And it's still he was that would have been around he would have been around 40 something, maybe close to 50 at that time. And I said that thing, and he took off. He was pissed. even at that age because of that thing. So, you have all of these dimensions that grow there. Um, the problem is A, you're not going to get A and B, C, D, E. You're not going to get 1 + 1 is 2. Okay. You're not going to get that kind of science out of astrology. It's not like that. It's more like psychology with some sociology thrown in, with modern, whatever they call the modern studies in there, so that we understand the culture that people are growing up in. The kids that are growing up today, they're going to take their astrology. It's going to be the same astrology, but they're going to use it differently because their mind is differently. How they see things is differently. Okay.
Well, in the philosophy department, they have logic class. And in logic class, you learn like true and false statements and all this kind of stuff. And so I think in an astrology program, you could have a lot of philosophy classes, and then you have all these technical classes. And I mean, the funding source for astrologers, I think the high level ones of us look at ourselves as professors. I mean, like you're a computer programmer kind of, but like I teach every Monday night, and it's like I am kind of a professor, like. But I set up the class myself, and it's not housed under a university. But I think if you're a really good astrologer, you kind of take it upon yourself to say, I'm just going to act professorally and then do this. So I teach philosophy side of things, and I teach the technical side of things. And it's like layers of cake, and we go back and forth. And so I mean, I guess maybe the funding for astrologers is just different because we're not housed under universities, but that doesn't mean we can't be as rigorous and scholarly as people in a university.
Yeah, I agree, but that's going to come down to learning. That's a mindset. You're not going to get, if the average astrologer, average is the wrong word. If you can become an astrologer by taking a weekend class, and all of a sudden you can put your shingle out and say, okay, I'm practicing astrology. Okay, how much credibility you think that gives to the profession?
Hmm.
If you don't have to go to a rigorous study. When I went with when our study with Noel, for example, if we were fast on the course, it would take us 2.5 years to get through it. People who have been through college that went through Noel's used to say his course was harder than their college courses were,
Hmm.
as an example. I'm not saying that to toot my horn. I'm saying that to say that there needs to be some sense of rigor. Now, what you're saying is with the university, that would provide a rigor. Kepler tried that and had it for a spell. A lot of great astrologers, including Chris and a few others, they came out of that. They're the product of that, and they are the ones that are taking astrology down one leg into the future.
Hmm.
Okay, so yeah, that would be really valuable. California, there are some colleges where they do teach astrology courses.
Hmm.
I don't think they teach it as a major. I don't know what it's part of.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, that would be great. As for you and I, yes, what we need to do and what I do too is I not only write the software, I not only do consultations, I also teach astrology. I have my own course that I teach. So
Right,
yeah, I agree. We're the ones that has to somehow bring the rigor
right, right.
down, and the rigor is going to be different depending on the style of astrology that you learn.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay, my rigor is going to be based on the way that made sense to me, which was what I learned from Noel, Richard Eidemann, and a few others over time. Stephen Aurora, some of Liz Green's and her group's work. That's the kind of astrology that appeals to me, I think because I can understand that best, and my understanding of myself aligns with that kind of knowledge that comes out of seeing things through that particular mirror or prism, if you will.
Nice.
So
Well, I don't mean to cut us off, but we are at the hour. But this was actually a very enlivening conversation. This is our extemporaneous episode where we had no idea what we are going to talk about. But as you can see, John and I have great talking chemistry. It's always a great conversation with John around. So, John, I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to have to keep harassing you and making him come on the show
no,
because
anytime you want. And by the way, there's no way I would ever be able to. What did you say early? Strong arm or harass or whatever you? There's no way.
all
It's
right.
impossible.
Well, okay. So, if you want to work with John at his school or get his program, we'll put those links in the video below. And I don't know if you want to tell us where to find you.
You can, if you want to know more about the software, it's astroperegrine, PEREGRINE.com. If you want to know about consultation or one-on-one student training, it's jmastro.com. So that's John Marcella jmastro.com.
Awesome, John. Well, thank you so much.
Okay,
This
well,
conversation
let
really.
me know. I'm here for you.
All right. Well, I'm gonna make you come back as a regular because I personally just love talking to you. So,
Yeah, me too. I always have a blast. Thanks, Andrea.
thanks, John.
Okay, bye.